Let's just start out by talking about On the Trail of, because this is kind of a departure from your other documentaries, in the format at least.
You mean it's shitty?
No. I mean, the other ones are self-contained, hour and a half long movies, and these seem to take a little bit of a deeper dive, with the episodic format. But also, the first one, the one about Champ, that was not produced by your regular Small Town Monsters crew, right?
No.
So how did the On the Trail of concept come about?
Yeah.
And then where did it go from there?
It's kind of a weird... So, On the Trail of was originally just going to be our way of getting other filmmakers to work with STM. It was going to be like a spin-off, kind of like episodic thing. We'd been wanting to play around with episodic storytelling. So the idea was we would bring on other filmmakers. They would tell stories. It would be kind of separated from the regular, films. So I'd known Alexander Pedikov, who directed Champ for a while, and we had been talking. He was actually at one point going to direct the Flatwoods Monster movie.
Oh.
We had talked about just straight up having him do an STM movie, but I was really concerned, and it's not because I wasn't concerned because I didn't think Alexander was capable of it. It was just it felt so weird to me to give away one of our movies to someone else, and especially that particular story because I really love that story. So I came up with the idea of On the Trail of being basically an episodic version of what we do now, except it would be more focused on footage that episodes would contain more footage of actually being out, with researchers and the kind of stuff that doesn't really get into our movies.
Mm-hmm.
And he was supposed to have a crew. He was supposed to have a full 4-man crew. And then, the day he's supposed to leave for Champ for the first weekend, everyone dropped out. And he ends up going by himself to do it. And I'm like, well, there's no way you're going to do that. I was like, I don't know how you're going to manage to do this on your own. He's like, no, I think I can do it. I was like, all right. So, Champ is, for what it was and for the amount of money it cost, I'm really impressed by what Alex did with it. There's things about it that we could have made better. I think part of the problem was his deadline was just too much for him to manage it. So if I had it to do over again, I'd just have given him more time. And, it's funny because, I feel like you're going to see, if we can make more of these, I feel like you're going to watch On the Trail of kind of morph over time into what it eventually is going to be. I still don't think it's quite, the concept is quite nailed down. It's really weird because it's almost like we're doing what we normally would do in pre-production on one of our movies. It's almost like what we're figuring these stories out and how the storytelling is going to go on the fly, as the series are being made.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't expect any more On the Trail of that are on a personal. Have the kind of personal stakes that On the Trail of Bigfoot does.
Yeah, because it is where Champ was a little more your standard docuseries. On the Trail of Bigfoot does seem to be really personal for you. Yeah, and I like that about it, even though I hate the fact that I'm in it. We've always taken great pains to keep ourselves out of the movies. I mean, I've always kept myself out of the movies. It's a personal pet peeve more than anything. I don't like when documentarians include themselves in their projects. I don't know why. It's always bothered me. But in this case, it was one of those things where it just seemed like a really natural storytelling device, and I tried to make it to where I'm not intruding into the story. I'm more just there as a teller of the story. And also, I wasn't going to include myself in this until way late in the game. I mean, there's an entire cut of episode 1 where I'm not in it.
I narrate it, but I'm not in the episode.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I don't appear in the Area X episode as well. It's like when I shot that back in June, I had no intentions of appearing in the series. I just thought I would narrate it.
Well, I did see you there a little bit, I think. You, and who was the guy that went in with you on that?
Adam,
Adam, yeah.
But you never actually see me. That's like the one, if you do, it's probably like, there might be one quick shot somewhere that was like shot on an iPhone or something, because I tried to do that. Like the second episode, I did that as well. I like included some iPhone footage of myself, because when we even as recent as like September, when we did the Pacific Northwest stuff, I didn't intend on being in that.
So what changed? What changed that made you decide to go ahead and inject yourself?
It was the first cut of the first episode I sent to Mark Matsky to watch and give me some feedback, and Mark is
he co-hosts a podcast with you, right?
Yeah, and he's one of the people that's in it, and he features in the first episode, but his feedback was basically it's really good. He said it hits the ground thinking rather than hits the ground running, and I was like, just like, I know Mark, and that is like kind of his way of saying it's boring. And so the idea was like, well, maybe if I can interject myself into it, then it gives a sort of natural storytelling device rather than just narration, and we could add bookend scenes that wouldn't just be, some B-roll and narration. Instead it would be, B-roll of us actually out in the woods or whatever. And so then that's why all the scenes with me are shot in either late October or November or December, because I had no intention of being in it until October, and it was basically just because it allowed us to switch up what you were seeing on camera and put some quote-unquote action on screen, and also just make sort of the transitions between all the different people and stories and locations be a little more seamless, I guess.
Well, I noticed one of the places where you're really prevalent is when you're talking with the reporter who helped break the Minerva monster story. Now, that one's really personal to you, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that story was outlined as far back, that episode was outlined as far back as last March when I interviewed Lauren Coleman, because I down to the title of that episode being Rise of the Monsters. That was originally supposed to be a two-part episode that was entirely about like various monster cases around the U.S. during the 70s, and she was locked in Barbara was locked into being in this pretty much from the beginning. I knew she would be a part of it. So yeah, that episode was a big deal just because of the Ohio connection. Our first movie was Minerva Monster. I really don't care for that movie. I've always wanted to revisit that story, and I don't think I'm going to get to, so this was kind of like my way of revisiting that story without doing some sort of either director's cut of the original movie or like a remake.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I can say that I quite enjoyed the Minerva Monster, but you can see definitely how you've grown as a filmmaker between that and the later productions.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even. My issue with that anymore isn't even the weird, amateur quirks that we're still figuring out. It's the story itself. We left so many pieces of it out that it's like we told, 1/3 of what is a really fascinating story, and just by cutting out some of the dead pauses in the interviews and some of the ums and stuff like that, we probably could have added an extra 5 minutes. By cutting out, the other thing was like, the guys that edited that movie, they included someone in the movie that didn't need to be in the movie that they felt like was telling basically a cool Bigfoot story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's never been something that's not something I would do now. I just, if we made that movie today, I would have made it differently. I do like the no narration aspect of that movie, though. I think the way Alan edited managed to make the story make sense without narration explaining things. It is still kind of works today. It's just if we left way too much out and included stuff that didn't need to be in.
And so I want to talk a little bit about where your opinion on this has shifted. You mentioned a little bit in the documentary series, or on the Trail of series, that you started out, you heard this story as a kid, right? The Minerva story?
Yeah.
And from there, after researching, you kind of, your belief in in whether or not this was an actual flesh and blood monster animal, went down to about 30%, you said. And then you had these experiences in Area X, and having been in X myself with Daryl and Alton and those guys, I understand what an impact being in an environment like that can have on you. Without giving too much away spoiler-wise, can you talk a little bit about Area X and the impact that had on you, and where are you now as far as percentage of skepticism versus I don't want to use the word belief, but possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned it in the narration too. It wasn't that I didn't believe the witnesses we talked to and stuff like that. It was that I've been doing this, I've been into this now. I haven't been into it as long as a lot of people have. I've only been into it like maybe 10, 12 years where I'm, kind of reading things and talking to people and talking to witnesses and stuff. So I haven't been into it that long, but after being into it for that long and being in like Whitehall and Fouke, Arkansas, and all these places where these famous Bigfoot cases, and never having, literally, to my mind anyway, never having a single thing happen that made me think these things might be out there, I was at a place where I was at about 30% that they existed. And I went to X just to make the episode. I fully expected nothing to happen. In fact, on the drive in, Adam and I were talking about, the various ways the NAWAC could be getting fooled or like hoaxed or whatever. We're talking about, there could be people coming in here. It could be, we were very my approach to this wasn't purposefully being, skeptical, but I had become extremely skeptical. So when we got in there, there was nothing that happened, including the eye shine. There was nothing that happened in the first 2 days that made me think any differently, really. I still was at like 30% on my last night when I went to bed. We'd heard sounds, and we basically just heard some sounds.
But you hear sounds out in the woods. That's that's part of being out in the woods. You hear animals. You hear sounds.
Yeah. And there was just nothing that changed my mind. And then that last night, we were in. We had gone to bed. I had the worst migraine. I had a migraine for basically 2.5 days. The entire time I was in there, I had this vicious migraine. I couldn't get rid of it no matter what I did. I'm in bed. It's about 2:30 in the morning, and we heard that rock. We heard like a rock just smash into the metal roof of the tin roof of the garage in there, or metal roof, or whatever it is. And there was like a 5 or 6 second pause, and then there was like a whoop that I always say sounds like an Apache Indian in a John Wayne movie. And it sounded like a human being making this like whoop sound, like whoop, right. And I mean, this was really close to our tent, 20 yards, 30 yards, and then this gibbon-like laughter that went for like 20 or 30 seconds. And
you guys didn't catch any of this really on recording, though.
No, nothing was. No, because I had just started falling asleep when it happened.
Uh-huh.
You know, and that's what's funny is, like, the rock crashes. I mean, there was probably, like, 30 seconds, 35 seconds where all this was going on, and I never once reached for my phone because I sat up. As soon as the rock smashed into the roof and the everything started, I sat, like, straight up, and I looked up at Adam, who sat straight up, and I was like, I mean, don't quote me on this, but I was like, oh, shit's about to happen. And, because I thought this was it. I thought, like, we're going to have, like, the rain of rocks again or something. And that was it. Like, that's all we heard. But, it's hard to describe what that was like for me because there's nothing that can throw rocks. You know, like, you tell someone who's not into this subject, like, I tell my wife about this, and she sits there with, like, this blank expression, like, okay, you heard, like, something crash into a roof and then some animal making noise in the woods. Like, why is that such a big deal for you? But I think for me, it's like I spent, 12 years or whatever into this subject, and I'd gotten to the point where I was, a couple feet away from saying, F it, like, there's nothing to any of this. And instead, I'm at a, like, I think about the stupid rock throw and the noise I heard almost every day, maybe every day.
I understand. I've been in there and I've experienced that rock throwing phenomenon as well. When we were staying in the cabin, the original property owners there had built. So and I had the same kind of thing. I was probably 70-30, 70% skeptic, 30%. Probably about the same that you were, and this was back when the NAWAC was still the TBRC, and they had the other Area Y, down in the Big Thicket, and Ken Helmer. You've met Ken, right?
I haven't met him. I know him.
Yeah. It was me and Ken Helmer were in a group out checking the camera traps, and we found a footprint on a. You're in the middle of a swamp and there's these hillocks of pine needles that come up out of the water, and in the middle of one of these, Ken's a big guy and he's not making a dent in this pine duff, and here it is. It looks like a foot with a big toe sticking out. It really was one of those things where I still can't say, that I believe, but it's one of those things that tames the skepticism, I guess I should say, a little bit, and makes you open up a little bit more to the possibility of it.
Yeah, I like that. Tames the skepticism. Because, like, it is, like, hard. It's funny, because I think a lot of Bigfooters, and I think a lot of people that aren't into this think that people just want to believe, so everything is Bigfoot, and I know a lot of people that are like that, and like the Night Stalker guys are like that.
Yeah, but, I kind of gathered that.
What's that?
Is that I kind of gathered that every owl hoot is a Bigfoot hoot. Every coyote call is, Bigfoot talking with the coyotes. I've gone out with those kinds of folks before as well.
For me, it's the opposite. Like, when I hear or see things, I don't, I initially I'm excited when I hear something, but I don't, even after this thing happened, I've tried to rationalize what could have been throwing something and what the noise could have been, And I mean, as soon as I called Brandon Dalo, and because him and I have always both been really into the Bigfoot subject, and I called him and I was like, hey, this was as soon as I was out of X. I mean, I was on my way to Nashville, and I'm telling him about it, and like his response was like, oh, dude, well, let me go look for some different sounds online. I'll see if we can match it. And he's like sending me like owls and all this stuff, and because like he's kind of at the same place I was when I went in, where he's pretty much done with this. Like, he's convinced they don't exist. Mm-hmm. So
did
it's a weird thing, because all I heard was a sound, two sounds, but you can't. It's very difficult for me to describe to people why a couple sounds could move you that far, without just seeming like another Bigfoot Yahoo. It's not like that. What I heard, I know sounds. We'd heard an owl earlier in the evening. I've heard fox call, and I know what a mountain lion sounds like, and I know what, I know what these animals sound like, and this was like being at a gorilla enclosure, or a monkey enclosure, or something in a zoo.
Yeah.
Really weird.
Well, and I think that it's hard to wrap your head around. It's easy to think that you're being hoaxed, but or that it's possible. But once you get into X, it's impossible to explain to people how remote that really is. You kind of have to experience that for yourself, going down that mule path on the way in there.
Yeah. That's what I try to say. Like, because I wouldn't even tell you everything Adam and I were saying, but we were like joking pretty much the entire drive to Alton's cabin about like, oh man, this is going to be so embarrassing when we get in here, and it's like a little cabin back in the woods, and like you're expecting. We get into Alton's cabin, and like one of the first questions I asked him was like, well, how far from here is X? And he says, I think he said 12 miles, and I was like, all right, and we're talking for a little while, and he goes, yeah, we'll need to leave at, like, I think he said, like, 6:30 or something like that in the morning. I'm like, all right. I was like, why so early or something? He's like, well, it takes about 2.5 hours to get in there from here.
Yeah, it's 12 miles as the crow flies.
Yeah.
But I've not actually been to Alton's cabin. That's he's just recently, the last time I was in X, he was still teaching at Mid-America. And had not retired and started building the cabin yet, and I've not been back there for several years. But I do remember going in there and just being like, Jesus, this is so far. I mean, you're just on logging roads, and there are times where the road completely disappears, and at that time it did. You'd have to drive around trees where the road was washed out. It's back there a little ways.
It's crazy. I've never been. That's actually, to me, the most unnerving thing about it, because I kept thinking, if something happens to you back here, like you get bit by like a snake, or you break a limb, or like something gets cut off, you're probably going to bleed out and die, or like, because I mean it's like a 3-hour drive to a hospital.
Yeah. Well, that's why on some of the old the old expeditions in there, we always took somebody with a nursing or a medical background. If Sawbones wasn't there, we had the two Shannons, who both have nursing backgrounds. I don't know how they're doing it now. Like I said, I haven't been in there for years, but we always took somebody with a medical background with us on each outing there, just to be on the safe side.
Yeah, we had Bob, but that it's still just like I really want to go back. I actually want to take my dad. I talked to Brian about like going next year and taking my dad or something, but I don't know right now that I'll get to go back in there this year. I can't foresee it right now.
Yeah. Let's move on a little bit, because I could sit and trade X stories with you all day, but let's move on a little bit to the local aspect of this. You were in Adams County, Ohio. You checked out some spots in Kentucky as well, right? But I don't think they made the cut.
I was in Kentucky for a couple of the interviews, actually, were shot in Kentucky. B-roll wise, I don't think there might be a couple shots in there that are actually Kentucky, but yeah, like as far as the focus, there's no focus in Kentucky.
Yeah. So let's talk about then Adams County, because I grew up mostly in Greenup County, Kentucky, which is catty corner across the river from Adams, and I spent my 6th and 7th grade years in middle school, going to West Union and Liberty there in Adams County. So let's talk about that area where you were at with the Night Stalker guys. How did that all come about?
I've known those guys for a few years. I'm trying to think of how to say this without it sounding how it actually was. On a personal level, I didn't like them. I'd been around them a couple times, and they were like extremely loud and really rambunctious, and I went into that thinking I'm not going to like these guys. That's just off the record. They seemed like I knew the Night Stalker guys through conferences and stuff like that, but they didn't really run in the same circles that I did, and I'd never really had a chance to sit down and talk to them or anything like that. But my friend Jeff Byers, that runs Creature Replica, who's like a part of some of our Kickstarters, he's a member, like an unofficial member of the Night Stalkers, and he had invited us down to Adams County because they were supposedly having all this activity down there. So I decided to go. We went down there, and like one of the first, hold on, sorry. Interesting. There was a phone call from Hollywood. Anyway, one of the first things I did was to interview those guys, and I ended up coming away from it with like a totally different opinion of them. I like how like passionate about the subject they are. And they might not go about everything, scientifically and all that stuff, but they're their hearts are in the right place, and they're really doing it out of an interest in the subject rather than some desire to make like $1 million or something, which is kind of refreshing.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, like we basically just got hooked up because I was aware of, all the activity that they'd supposedly been having, and some of the sounds that they'd recorded seemed interesting to me at the time, and I thought it would be a cool sort of counter to Northeast Ohio, although once I got down there, the two areas really don't look that different.
No, they're all still part of the Appalachian chain,
Yeah, they're actually very similar, but there is something creepier about that Adams County area than like, where Minerva is, or even Salt Fork. There's something about it down there that's very dark. It just seems like a very dark sort of place.
I think that's a good description. It's a good description. Those kind of guys, it's interesting, and I think you kind of touch on this a little bit in the film, the difference between those folks, for whom it's almost a matter of faith, versus groups like NAWAC and maybe to a little bit of a lesser extent Olympia, who are definitely trying to go through a scientific protocol.
Yeah.
And that does seem to be kind of the back and forth.
Dude, I mean, those sounds that they played for us, and even that we play in the show, I mean, I'm pretty convinced most of that's coyote. There might be a couple things thrown in there that are weird, but to me, most of what they're recording is coyote and typical sounds. But it doesn't matter. Those guys, they don't. This is why. If I could even go down that trail, I'm going to start talking off. It's going to be like off the record, and then we're just going to end up having a whole conversation. One of the things that bugs me about the NAWAC is how, they're so stringent on the fact that their way is the only way, and there's this weird mocking of anyone that does anything differently, and that's always kind of bugged me about the NAWAC. I don't have a problem with the way Mike and Mike do things. They have no interest in proving Bigfoot's real or any of that. They solely go out in the woods to have some sort of encounter, and that's all that's driving them out into the woods. So I think that's one thing that's always bugged me is everyone's going to have their own specific reasons for doing what they do.
Well, for me, I appreciate what the NAWAC does, as far as trying to maintain some scientific standards. But to me, the reason that I'm interested in this phenomenon, whether it's real or not, physically real, my background is in history and social sciences before I fell into writing. As a folklorist and a student of sociology, I'm interested in these stories and in whether or not it's actually physically real or not. Why do people interpret something if they experience something and they don't know what that was? Why does one person say, "Well, that must have been a bear I saw," and the next person says, no, that was a Bigfoot, or no, that wasn't sleep paralysis, I really was abducted by aliens, or no, that wasn't headlights, that had to be a monster with huge eyes. The why people interpret those things is still interesting to me, like I said, as a student of sociology and folklore. And so, I can appreciate what those guys like the Night Stalkers are doing on that level. But, I think that the guys in the NAWAC do, they want to prove it. They want to prove that it's real. Daryl will tell you about his sightings on the Pedernales River, when he had his first sighting and how much it shook him. And he wants that validation. I think he even says in your video that he's looking forward to making them eat a big pile of crow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I came away from this with. It's funny because I didn't set out to make anything about the community or the culture behind it, but I think at the end of it, I mean, it's probably more about that than it is the creature itself in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I can see that. And the personalities are a big part of it. You have that whole episode that you dedicate to Renee DeHenden and John Green and Grover Krantz and Peter Byrne, right? And in a lot of ways, those personalities, those guys are gone, but there are still other big personalities in there. And I would count Lauren Coleman probably amongst those. Moving on a little bit ahead, let's talk about the actual Kickstarter for this. That launches on February 7th?
Yeah.
And how long is that going to run?
It'll run until March 9th. We do a Kickstarter right around the beginning of each year, and it kind of is. I mean, you already know this, but we do the Kickstarters basically to fund everything we have coming out throughout that year.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, it comes out. It starts on February 7th, ends on March 9th. We do that live Q&A on Facebook, and that's kind of a big part of it. We found a couple of years ago that really helps drive interest in backing the Kickstarter. So. Mm-hmm. And as our budgets continue to expand, we are more and more reliant on the Kickstarters, which is cool and scary at the same time because early on that wasn't the case. It was we didn't rely on the Kickstarter to make the movies, and now for the last 2 years, I think we're in a place where the budgets are to the point where we wouldn't be able to make them without those Kickstarters.
But being able to have that feedback from the community and seeing that there actually is the interest has to also be a little heartening.
Oh yeah. We've when we did Minerva Monster, I think we sold 1,000 DVDs in the first year. And that was the only way to get Minerva Monster was a DVD or. Maybe a screen. We did some local screenings, and then we had Vimeo on demand. And I think, total, we probably had 2,000 total sales across all platforms in that first year. And then, this past, as of 2 months ago, I know our Amazon numbers all time was over 2 million. So 2 million views. So the audience went from a couple thousand to a couple million in the span of 4 years, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's beyond respectable growth. The other two projects that you're going to be kickstarting along with this, they're the Thunderbird and the Momo stories, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. The Illinois Terror in the Skies is. I call it a Thunderbird movie, but it's really about winged cryptids, and it's separated into 3 chapters, not chapters, but sections. Each movie is there's 3 sections in the movie. The first section is Southern Illinois, the middle section is Central Illinois, and then the final section of the movie is Northern Illinois. And it starts with the Piasa Piasaw Bird legend, and then it goes into like the 1948 Thunderbird flaps. Then it goes to Lawndale in the 1970s. We interviewed a witness in Kankakee, and then it goes northern Illinois, and we look at the Chicago Mothman flap.
Oh, nice.
So,
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of different cryptids actually represented in that movie besides just the Thunderbirds. And it does a really... I'm editing it right now, so obviously stuff's going to get cut out. But as of right now, it's probably our most like historic movie where we, like probably the most sort of like local history, because each section is going to have its own little like local history section. So it's almost like 3 Small Town Monsters movies in one, but all kind of tied together by like the location and then also the winged cryptids. And then Momo is going to be a traditional Small Town Monsters movie and a sort of 1970s Sasquatch exploitation horror movie wrapped into one.
You've kind of been releasing these sort of in trilogies. I would take Minerva, Whitehall, and Falk together as a Bigfoot trilogy, and Chestnut Ridge, Mothman, and Flatwoods as an Appalachian, and I would take these next 3 as kind of a Midwestern trilogy. Is that something that you plan on keeping up with, and where are you going to focus your next set on?
Yeah, the Midwest wraps with Momo, so it'll be Bray, Terror in the Skies, and Momo, and then next is Southern Monsters, which will kick off with the Mothman Legacy, which I don't know how far south you can consider West Virginia, especially along the Ohio River, but it'll be the Southern Monsters. It'll be the Mothman Legacy, which is sort of a direct continuation / sequel to the Mothman of Point Pleasant. The Bell Witch, and whatever is after that.
Haven't decided on that yet.
Well, I mean, we have a list. It's just that one wouldn't even be filming until 2020, late 2020. So I haven't gotten to the point yet where I've made a decision. All
right. Is there anything else that we've not touched on here about the current project? Anything else you want to say? Anything else you would like us to focus on here?
No, I think we got it.
All right, man. I really do appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, Seth.
Yeah, thanks for calling.
Yep, and I will send you links to this once it's all out. I'm probably going to try to see if it will be out before your Kickstarter starts. I'm going to try to see if I can do this for our magazine instead of for the actual newspaper. And that way it would be in all the regional magazines, not just ours, but also the Ashland, Moorhead, which is down toward the Daniel Boone National Forest, where there's a lot of those sightings and stuff.
Yeah.
There's actually just recently I have heard that there has been a Bigfoot sighting reported to the BFRO like 3 miles from my house, where I'm living at now in Elliott County.
Yeah.
So,
Elliott County?
Yeah, I'm in Elliott County, Kentucky, right now.
Okay, that's right. I was thinking you were Ohio for some reason.
Well, I did work for the Ironton Tribune.
Okay.
For a while, whenever I interviewed you about the Mothman series, I was working for the Ironton paper. I have crossed back across the river to the Promised Land. So yeah, I'm way down in the middle of nowhere in Elliott County now. I'm any direction you go from me, I'm about 20 minutes from Grayson Lake State Park, 30 minutes or so from Carter Caves State Park, about a half an hour from the Daniel Boone National Forest, about 20-30 minutes from Cave Run Lake. I'm just completely surrounded by national parks where I'm at right now. Really lucky. I can step out on my back porch in my underwear if I want to and have coffee when it's not nasty like it is right now. But yeah, I was I was hoping for a little more Kentucky stuff, being a Kentucky boy. But seeing Adams County in there and X both really got my blood flowing because, like I said, I've spent so much time in both those locations. Adams County, actually, there's a lot of stuff out of Adams County that's going to be in my book when and if it ever comes out. So.
Yeah, if we can do a part 2 of On the Trail of Bigfoot, it'll get into Tennessee, Kentucky, some of the places I didn't get to do much.
Well, I mean, okay, so one more question then before I let you go. What is next for On the Trail of? Because we've done Champ and now we've done Bigfoot. Is there something else on the horizon from someone else, or?
It would be me as of right now. We're talking about doing On the Trail of UFOs, and the central character would be Shannon LeGros. Because I hate being in front of the camera. So that's currently the plan would be, to try to put her in it and have her be the central narrator, storyteller, and I would just be in charge of filming it and editing it. But all that's going to be predicated on how this one does. I mean, On the Trail of Champ didn't make a dime, so we'll see what happens with On the Trail of Bigfoot. It doesn't, it has a bit of an uphill climb because it's episodic, but also it doesn't have the animation and the recreations that people really seem to love about our stuff. It doesn't really have that. But it never was supposed to, and to be honest with you, that stuff is window dressing for me. I know that's the stuff that people really love, and they respond to that, and it's eye-catching and all that, but for me, that's always been secondary to the story and the people. So I was excited about doing it On the Trail of, because it was almost like a return to Boggy Creek or Beast of Whitehall and just telling the story.
Well, I've really enjoyed all 6 episodes of this. I just, I sat and watched the first 3 all in a sitting. I would have done the same thing with 4 through 6 if I hadn't had a meeting I had to go to. But I came back in the office the next morning and started out right where I'd left off in the middle of the Area X episode. And just plowed through it. The animations that start out Bray Road Beast, I think visually is some of the strongest, most compelling stuff that you guys have done so far as far as the animations. And I really liked that. It was really pretty. But that is not what I come to these things looking for. I come looking for the stories. And I think On the Trail of has really done that in a solid way. It doesn't necessarily have the excitement, the wow, what was that of the BFRO show or of any of the expedition, the Destination Truth type stuff. But there's still there's so much content there. Real meat as opposed to the icing. And I think that I really hope that On the Trail of Bigfoot does well for you and you guys can do more, because I've really, really enjoyed this. I enjoyed Champ. I enjoyed watching that with my stepson, because he's crazy into dinosaurs. And so, I think it was the first time that he has sat down and watched something like that with me without complaining about wanting to watch cartoons. But this one, man, this one has really gotten me. And, just if I can just say, I'm really impressed with your writing on this, and I'm really impressed with how far you guys have come in a few short years as filmmakers. You can really see the growth. And I'm going to stop before I completely fanboy out.
Thanks, dude.
All right. Well, thanks again for talking with me, Seth, and I'll send you links as soon as this is all done.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right, later.